Hi guys, this is Mo Volans back for Audiotuts.com with a quick tip that's based on both mixing and mastering, somewhere halfway in between. And we're going to be looking at how to preserve headroom. Now, preserving your headroom in the final throes of a mixing session is really important, because when you pass things on to a mastering engineer, or you may be mastering things yourself, either way, heading into that mastering area of the workflow, it's going to be really important that you have headroom to work with. Now, what do I mean by headroom? If you're brand new to the concept and you're new to music production, headroom is essentially the space here on the master output between your highest level reached and the clipping at the top there. So it's this area here, dynamic range if you like, and really just the space you have, the distance you have before you reach clipping or overs or distortion. And 4 dB, minus 4 dB, sorry, is considered a good place to be. We're a little above that, as you can see, but at our peaks. But I always think if you've got 2 or 3 dB, especially if you're mastering yourself and you know where you're at, it's okay to be a little higher. If you're passing on to a mastering house, you really want to check with them, because a lot of mastering places have very specific rules about where you should be on your master output. Essentially, you don't want to have any treatment on the master output at all. And your master wants to be at what's called unity gain, so you're at 0 dB. Now, if you do start to experience overs, you can see in this mix, and it's a pretty chilled sort of atmospheric thing, even at the louder sections, we've got plenty of headroom here. But let's simulate a situation where maybe we didn't have so much headroom, so I'll just make it clip. And I'll show you a couple of tricks for reducing things. So we'll put a gain plugin in here and we'll boost it. Okay, so you can see it's clipping there. When you're clipping a small amount like that, you're not going to get horrible artifacts, but it is clipping all the same. So what would you do? Well, you don't do this. Don't just bring the master output down. That you will. I mean, going back to analog systems, this was a real no-no. In digital systems, it's not so bad, but ultimately you can have frequency response, dynamic range issues. So it's better to stay at unity gain on all your master outputs. Now, the alternative to turning down the master output is to grab everything in your mix and move it down relatively. And in most DAWs, if you do this, it keeps the relative mix. You can see in Logic it's doing that. So let's get to the loudest section, and you can see I've clawed back some some headroom, sorry. So there you go, here's the loudest section really. You can see that we're about where we were. And the mix is exactly the same. Okay, so that's probably your best bet. Now, if in some of your mixes you have some automation on some of the channels, some level automation, the automation here is simply on the sends. But let's imagine that this automation was moving this fader up and down. If I deselect, it was moving up and down in the mix. It would be difficult to grab everything and turn it all down, because that channel there would simply pop back to its default state, or to its state that you've told it to be with your automation. Now, of course, you could edit the automation, but if you've got it on several channels, you can have a real problem. So what I would suggest is grabbing, say, all the drums or the pads and, rebussing them. So let's say these 3 channels were at some similar instruments. You could bus these into the next free channel, and we could go ahead and carry on doing that. Obviously, these aren't correct, but this is just showing you how you could work. And then you could move these buses down. So it's better to move groups of, say, 8, 9, 10 instruments at a time in buses, or all your automated channels, for example, into a bus, and move it down with everything else to a relative point, rather than move the master fader down still. And then once you've done this and you've got your gain in the right place, then you can start applying your mastering processes, or export it into another project to start mastering, and you should be ready to go. But there's a couple of approaches, a couple of ways to attack, claiming back some of that headroom, and hopefully that'll be useful to you in the end of your next mixing session, moving into mastering.